Hello, everyone. How are you? Are you feeling good? So this is the first talk in the sort of mini ZK track at the Web3 Summit. I was asked to kind of program this. So we put together multiple talks all about ZK topics. Sadly, we had two of our speakers cancel pretty much like this week. So we're replacing their talks with a panel at the end of the three talks. But I'm going to kick off with the state of ZK. So this is what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to start with a quick intro to myself. I'm going to share a bit about the history of ZK, mostly from a research perspective. Then we're going to look at the map of ZK. So this is like the industry, and this will also be somewhat historic. And then I'm going to talk about the narratives and how they've changed over time, some of the challenges. And if you're interested in jumping into ZK, I'm going to share a bunch of the resources at the end. So I'm going to start with myself. I'm Anna. I'm the co-host of a show called Zero Knowledge. We started the show in 2018. It actually started when I was working at Parity on the Polkadot project. And my co-host at the time, Frederick, just wanted to do a show. So we kicked it off. And only on episode 11 did we name it the Zero Knowledge Podcast. And little did I know what Zero Knowledge would become. Because at the time, I think there was 50 people working on it. And today, as you'll see, it's evolved into something much bigger. In 2019, I started another company, or co-founded a company called ZKV. ZKV validates on various proof-of-stake networks, including Polkadot, Kusama, and Moonbeam, and as well as many, many others. And what we do is through ZKV, we get to do things like funding ZK projects, championing ZK ecosystems within the ecosystems that we validate on. And we also do grants. Yeah, we do cool stuff there. In 2021, ZK Podcast and ZKV co-produced an event series called ZK Hack, which has since evolved into a learning hub for ZK. And so these are three distinct companies, and they do different things with different teams. But between them, here's some of the other things that you may have come into contact with, like the ZK Summit is something we produce from the podcast, a jobs board, state of ZK report, ZK Mesh, and ZK Whiteboard sessions. I'm going to be sharing more about all of these near the end when we get to resources. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the history of ZK. So, and actually you'll see this is more from the research side, and I'm going to just sort of in the middle show you where some of the work I did starts to intersect with the history. But yeah, let's start off. So Zero Knowledge Proofs, invented in 1982, first published in 1985. They're invented by Goldwasser, Macaulay, and Rakoff. And Macaulay and Goldwasser later, in 2012, win the Turing Award, and in part for this work. But this stays primarily in the land of academia. There are new research papers that come out, but they're kind of considered too slow to be practical. Around this time, you also have all these attempts to explain ZKPs. So you may have heard of the Alibaba cave, the Where's Waldo example, or the two balls and a colorblind friend example. And around this time, we also hear a bit more about what a ZKP is. Basically, it starts to be defined. It has three characteristics: completeness, soundness, and zero knowledge. So completeness is where an honest prover, an honest verifier will always prove truth. An honest prover can always convince an honest verifier. Soundness is where a dishonest prover cannot convince an honest verifier. And zero knowledge is where there's no information other than whether the statement is true, leaked. All right, here's where it gets into the action. Here's where implementation can really start. So in 2012, or actually I think today I just learned, and a little bit before, the concept of snarks were finally defined. Snarks are succinct, non-interactive arguments of knowledge. And this was the first time that you saw ZKPs being able to be implemented and used in a practical way. And sadly, though, with snarks came this trusted setup that was also introduced. In 2013, there was a group of researchers who realized they could combine these snarks with blockchain. Bitcoin already existed around there. And so in 2013, the Zero Coin paper was released. This was then followed by, this is where it gets kind of complicated too. In 2014, there's the Zero Cash paper, which is an extension on the Zero Coin paper. In 2015, the Zero Cash authors create the Zero Coin company, and then Zero Coin rebrands to Zcash. And another project at the same time is also released based on this work called Zcoin. So there's Zcash and Zcoin, all based on Zero Cash, which was based on Zero Coin. Anyway, it was fun doing the research. I'd always been kind of confused by these, but a year later, Groth 16 is published. So Groth 16 is a proving system that today we still see many, many projects using. And it's like, I think it's the most used proving system. It's the most battle tested. There's plenty of implementations. I understand it's becoming a standard as we speak. In 2017, the Fry paper is published, and this becomes relevant because Fry starts, like later on, starts to be incorporated into a lot of the snark constructions. So this is where my work starts to intersect with ZK. In 2018, in January, we started our weekly show called the Zero Knowledge Podcast. We'd done experiments in 2017, but like that was when we really started weekly. And then in March, we hosted the first ZK Summit. So that's 2018. And that year, it went from 0 events to 4 ZK-focused events. So in May, there was the first ZK Proofs event, and in July, Zcash hosted the ZCon 0 event. And we actually hosted a second ZK Summit that year as well. In terms of research, the highlights for 2018 was the publishing of Starks and Bulletproofs. In 2019, we experienced what we felt was an explosion of research, especially near the end of the year. People were publishing like groundbreaking works one after another. And Mikera, a friend of mine, coined the term Snarktember, and that bled into Snarktober. And I think she tried to do it with November, but it didn't work as well. Snarkvember? Anyway, in 2018, the big research highlights were Plonk and Sonic, I'd say, but Plonk especially was, and since then, Plonk, like Groth 16, has been implemented in all these different ways, kind of used as a precursor to a lot of the research that followed. Sonic was also very exciting because it introduced this concept of universal snarks, which became very relevant later on. We were still doing the ZK Summit events, and actually Plonk was presented for the first time at ZK4, which is something I feel kind of proud of because it became so important to our ecosystem. In 2020, we had the following research come out: Fractal, Plookup, Halo and Halo 2, I think both came out that year. Pickles from the Mina team, Quarks, and the first Plonky. I think Halo 2 of this generation is probably the most relevant with, again, it is once again this very important proving system that's been implemented many times, and lots of the ZK teams that you know they're using Groth 16, some form of Plonk, or likely some form of Halo 2. Not everyone, but a lot. Plookup is also the first time that lookup tables are kind of introduced in our context, which adds a level of kind of efficiency gain. In 2021, another technique called IVC, or folding, is introduced with the Nova paper. There's other work like Breakdown or SnarkPack, and then Ariel Gavizon continues to make amazing acronyms and rhymes with the word plonk, like faflonk and splonk, and I think this is where it chills out. I think this is the peak plonk puns. Yeah. 2022, we have Plonky 2. This, again, I would put in that category of like important work that influenced the ecosystem. And then we see variations on Plonk, like hyperplonk. You have variations on Nova, like supernova. You have that lookup work I mentioned that started with Plookup, kind of continuing. There's actually other work between Plookup and these, but Culk and CQ come out that year. And then from the Mina team, they also have Kimchi. And here's where you learn that the ZK folks need new naming systems, because I don't know if you noticed that, but it's like hyperplonk and supernova, then it's hypernova and superplonk? I don't know. 2023 highlights would be hypernova, which was kind of using this folding but taking it to a new level. Bojum came out from the Matter Labs team. Binius, which I think also falls into one of those key works, and we're going to hear from one of the authors later in this afternoon. And we also had the SumCheck work from Justin Thaler with Jolt and Lasso come out last year. And so far this year, we have Stir, which is taking, I mentioned Fry. Fry started to be mixed with snarks. Fry used to only be for Starks, and then it started to be mixed with snarks. And that really opened up the field. Now with Stir, this is sort of an improvement on Fry. So what's so interesting about like ZK research, it's just like the minute people could figure out how to define the different parts of the snark was the minute that they could start to optimize those parts. And then they introduced new techniques, and then they optimized those techniques. And I feel like Stir sort of falls in that, where like Fry was started to be added to snarks, and then Fry could be improved. There's also polymath, which I actually don't know that much about and need to read up on. It's very new to me. And we have Plonky 3 that came out. And I think I may have missed some things from 2024 highlights, but we're doing a panel later today where we can also fill that in. So yeah, just a summary of the history of ZK. It was academic and theoretical and sort of impractical until 2013. ZK mixed with blockchains, which meant an explosion in research and obviously an explosion in funding for that research. And ZK performance has improved exponentially and is now being used beyond Web3. So next up, I'm going to share with you the map of ZK. So everything I've shown so far is sort of like the chronology of the research. I sort of mentioned some of our events because we saw a lot of that research through our events. But here's the map of the projects. So in 2017, the focus of ZK was primarily privacy and specifically private payments. There were 2 founded companies working on ZK, at least in our space, and that was Zcash and Firo, which used to be Zcoin. Then, in 2019, we realized that you could maybe use ZK for scaling. There's also some new privacy projects, which are Aztec and ZK Sync. And Mina, which used to be Coda, introduced this concept of recursion, which was like a form of scaling or compressing a blockchain. Now, in 2020, we are introduced to the concept of L2s or ZK rollups. And I think Aztec may not have been a rollup at that time. They are now. ZK Sync has since become a rollup. And we get our first ZK game in the form of Dark Forest. So now I'm going to fill out these boxes. So we have payments, L2s, L1s, and gaming. So this is what these look like in 2024. So obviously we have a lot more projects. I just learned about another game that I need to add to this list. But yeah, there's kind of a lot going on. But the really exciting stuff is that, like if you see the larger ecosystem, we've really expanded the use cases for ZK. And I don't have the timeline, so this is why I kind of am jumping from 2020 or 21 to 24, because I don't know exactly when each of these becomes a topic or theme. But you have DeFi, you have ZKML, you have hardware. So all of a sudden, we realize that we're working on making these proofs more efficient, but what if we had hardware that you could run them on and it would actually also add to that improvement? Gaming, obviously growth. So also this idea of using ZK for scaling or compression means maybe they could be used for light clients or cross-chain. You've had actually the ZK for ID use case has been around for a really long time, but especially this year, we've seen so many teams start to use it. And a lot of the reasons for this is like ZK proving systems, ZK tooling, it's all become much more usable. I mean, 8 years ago, I don't think we could have imagined doing hackathons just for ZK stuff, and today we do that. Yeah, I think some of the most exciting stuff is actually over in the R&D audit area. So this is where you have teams, obviously they're doing audits, but sometimes they're also coming up with new use cases, theoretic use cases, or constructions. We're actually going to hear from one of these groups just after I speak, Nico. And also this miscellaneous tools. This I actually need help with from you, because I put this together, and I'm not sure, it's possible some of those could be filed in other categories, but I think some of these also are kind of newly defined topics or threat use cases, uses of ZK. So this is sort of a quick summary of the narratives over time, not in any particular order. Well, actually, kind of in an order. I just don't know if this is exactly the correct order, but privacy and payments seem to have been first. Then it was scaling and L2s and compression. Then we had this idea of bridges, where you could have smaller light clients because of ZK. You had ID, which was always one of these early privacy use cases, but ID could also be, it's proving proving certificates or proving, it doesn't, privacy is a cool thing, but I think it's the fact that ZK can also prove verify the correctness of something can be used in that context. You had, in I think it's 2023, coprocessors became a big topic, ZKML, and then followed by verifiable compute. This is actually, to me, in terms of narrative, something that was really only defined this way to me this year, even though the projects building verifiable compute have been around for about 2 years. But you can sort of see the narrative or the theme that the true use case coming to life. There's these projects that are doing Web2 to Web3 proving, so proving something about a website. As mentioned, there's the hardware. A really new narrative is the ZK supply chain, where if you're making lots of proofs, you could actually do a proving marketplace where lots of people use specialized hardware to try to prove faster than the others and earn something. Or you could have proof verification, proof, what do we call it? Aggregate, what do we call this again? Aggregation, what is it? Yeah, proof verification aggregators, something like that. Anyway, there's this other part of the ZK supply chain that's also emerged. And then there's one that is not blockchain, so content provenance. This is the idea that if you had an image and you did a transformation on it, actually, let's say this, you had an image that was signed with a cryptographic signature, and you did a transformation like a crop or a blur or something, you could actually create a ZKP proving that the new image comes from that original image. And this becomes really relevant in the case of just trying to prove the veracity of some image from the start. And so we're really seeing these use cases kind of go beyond blockchain. But there's still some challenges. I think performance, even though, I think this whole story is about how much performance we've been able to get out of these snarks. It's so incredible how far it's come. And still, there's certain use cases that were proposed back when I started in this space, in 2017, where ZKPs may not be the solution, in part due to the performance. There's also regulatory concern, because obviously ZK and privacy, they're very much intertwined, and we've seen what's happened with some companies in our space where, they were especially, I think the big one here would be Tornado Cash, which had an OFAC sanction against it because it was being used by, folks who wanted to use ZK for not a great use. And I think it's funny, that was in 2022, and around that time, I remember thinking it would be it could break our industry if a big ZK project gets in trouble. And then it happened. And I was really worried. And I'm happy we've kind of gone through it. And yet, I think there's still a question, because if you think about ZK and its power, privacy is part of that. But I see a lot of the teams have just sort of wanted to avoid tackling that, primarily because of this regulatory concern. I also think there's not enough funding for the ZK applications and the non-blockchain use cases. All of it has been focused on infrastructure, and specifically blockchain. And I've come into contact with teams who are trying to build applications, and people don't really know how to price them yet, and they're having a harder time fundraising. I also think ZK, just in general, where we're at in the hype cycle, I'm not sure where we're at. Are we peaked? Are we past? Are we in a trough before we go higher? I'm not sure, and I think I'm always a bit worried about, if it's being hypey or not. And some people try to convince me that I should be worried because there's other forms of cryptography on the rise that are going to steal the crown from ZK, such as FHE, MPC, and T. But I don't really know if that's a challenge because I find they get used in tandem a lot with ZK. But maybe there's a cryptography that comes along and makes ZK obsolete. Okay, I'm now going to share with you some resources. This is a bit of a survey of the ecosystem. If you want to get involved in ZK, if you are trying to learn about it, here's some places you should look. I did add a lot of our own channels in here because I think they're relevant, but I also am including, obviously, the amazing work from the 0x Park team or the PSE team. PSE is from the Ethereum Foundation. They're creating so many, like a lot of those use cases that we see now. I think even like ZK rollups originally came out of there, just the concept, the architectures. You also have the ZK podcast Telegram group, which is a Wild West Telegram group. Anyone who's been in there, it's a place where people's careers are made, dreams are broken, tears are shed, laughter is had. It's pretty intense. It's really hard to moderate. I don't love doing that, but it's a big group, and actually a lot of the news around ZK or the action is happening in there. We also have the ZK Hack Discord, which is a great place to do. If you're interested in learning, this would be a place I would definitely check out. I have all the links at the end of this presentation. And then in terms of events, like we've seen more and more events. So the ZK Proof event I mentioned, actually any Ethereum-focused event like DevCon or DevConnect or ECC often has a ton of ZK side events happening. There's like ZK Day, or we hosted once upon a time the ZK Paris, or lots of cool ZK events. There's also the Science of Blockchain conference, which this past year was in New York. We on the ZK Hack front do hackathons like ZK Hack Montreal, which we just did. And that's actually really cool if you want to find out what people can do with the tools, if you ever want to play with the tools. And then we have ZK Summit. And as I mentioned, ZK Summit 1 was March 2018. As you can see, we're now at ZK Summit 12. I'm going to do a quick plug because it's coming up. So ZK Summit 12 is happening in October, on October 8th in Lisbon. And you can already apply to attend and get an early bird ticket at zksummit.com. And it's pretty exciting that we've made it to 12. We do this twice a year. It's not that I've been, thanks. It's not that I've been running it for 12 years. Although I think I've been running it for 2008, it's like 6 years? It's pretty long. Okay, here's some other resources for learning. So courses, content, and jobs. There is a ZK MOOC that was created, I think in 2022. The 0x Park folks have done some great educational stuff with the Modern Zero Knowledge Cryptography course. You can actually, just in terms of links here, there's a way for me to give you these links that's better than trying to copy them off the slide. But anyway, so we produced from ZK Hack the ZK Whiteboard Sessions. That was a 19-module educational content piece. It's on YouTube. You have the Snargs book from Alessandro Chiesa, which just came out this year, I think, earlier this year. Over at the ZK Hack Discord, we also run study groups about different books and video series. So we've done the Thaler book, the Whiteboard Sessions. We're going to hopefully be doing a Snarg book study group. And what those are is like a small group of people get together and they go through this content chapter by chapter. So if you're interested in joining in one of these, please check it out. Also, if you've led anything like this before and want to lead them, it's definitely from the community. We also have Nico's ZK Jargon Decoder, ZK Jargon, which is a great tool if you're looking for definitions for what some of these words mean, because it's pretty tricky. It's sort of you really have to, you need a little bit of help sometimes knowing how to navigate the texts. And then once you've done all these and you feel you're ready for a job in ZK, there is a ZK jobs board, which is also off the Zero Knowledge Podcast website. And sort of to wrap up here, we have some reports. This is sort of a survey of reports and news if you want to keep track. We actually have copies of the State of ZK quarterly report, which is produced by ZKV. So we do that every quarter, and it's just sort of a look at what's been happening in the quarter, narratives, kind of similar to this presentation, but maybe a bit less historic, only looking at 3 months. ZK Mesh is a monthly newsletter, which ZK Hack produces, and that's just like recent research, top articles, project updates, and we do a ZK Mesh mini every week on Twitter as well. Recently, Electric Capital released this ZK market map, which is sort of similar to what I have done with the map of ZK, but I mean, they listed 273 projects, and it's slightly differently organized from what we did, but it's really interesting to just see how big it is actually. And then ZK Security has like a Hacker Noon type website where you can or Hacker News. You can basically see the latest news over there at ZK Security. Yeah, and then there's the podcast, which I don't really think of as news, but if you listen to it, it might also help you stay in the loop. Here are some of the links if you want to check out any of these things. And that's my Twitter. And just, I think yesterday, I asked folks for great resources, how to learn ZK. So if you scroll through what people have answered, I think you'll get most of the stuff that I have captured in this presentation. All right, and that's it. Thanks.